And now we will deep delve into this situation with Russia and Ukraine. We have Javed Rana joining us from Pakistan. Javed, thank you so much for joining us here on A News once again.
Thank you, Alif.
Well, let's start with the Witkoff's visits. How could Witkoff's visit to Russia influence global perception of U.S. foreign policy, especially amidst ongoing international conflicts, in your opinion?
I think to begin with, President Trump is trying to play tricks. First, he gave a deadline, which is probably ending by Friday, to Russia that if there is no ceasefire agreement, there will be secondary sanctions on Russia. And then he's also pushing hard on India, which has been importing oil from Russia. Again, the point is, in a broader context, what we know so far, I think the situation is clear to the extent that Russia, for the first time, has told Witkoff, at least discreetly, not publicly, about the conditions under which Russia would be willing to go for some sort of a ceasefire agreement. Now, these are the conditions of Russia. We can now safely speculate what those conditions would revolve around. I think those would be that the territory which Russia has already been holding, particularly the Ukraine's territory, where there is a Russian population in majority. I think Russia would like to retain it. And then so obviously Crimea is going to be, which already had some 10 years ago, Russia had taken over. I think in a broader context, Russia is holding as much as 20% Ukraine's territory. And I think much of it is going to be retained by Russia. This is a likely scenario. Now, for the first time, we have also heard Ukraine's President Zelensky saying that there is a possibility of the ceasefire agreement. And the similar views have been echoed by the US Foreign Secretary Rubio. So there are indicators that there is a possibility of a ceasefire agreement in not so distant future. And then there is also talk about the possibility of a meeting between President Trump and President Putin. Again, these are just initial indicators. We cannot say fundamentally that there would be a ceasefire agreement, because that is something easier said than done. Will Ukraine be willing to concede to the Russian demands? I think there is going to be some problems. But my understanding is that the USA is going to be on side of Russia to the Russian demands, because that is where the real problem is. And Ukraine wants USA to put more and more pressure on Russia to withdraw from its territory. I think probably there are going to be problematic areas. Ukraine, by maximum, I think it would be willing to accept Crimea as Russian's territory. I think Ukraine can withdraw its claim over Crimea. That is a most likely scenario. But again, the bigger problem is about the Donbass region, where mostly there is the Russian population. I think the probability is that Ukraine would also be willing to accept Russian sovereignty over that territory. But that is, again, something easier said than done.
Well, given the reports, let's talk about it as well, that President Donald Trump could meet Putin coming days to discuss the ceasefire. What concrete mechanisms would be needed to ensure any agreement? Is this credible, do you think, and enforceable on the ground?
Well, I think it's a very risky business for Donald Trump. If there is no ceasefire agreement, if they meet, I think he would lose his credibility, which is already at the lowest level. So I think that will be a big shock internationally to the Trump. Now, this is also an opportunity, if there is ceasefire agreement, that he would be telling to the world that after Pakistan and India, he has also managed to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia. But again, these are more for the public consumption. It's more for the optics, where he's trying to project himself as a peacemaker. But I think when it comes to Gaza, everybody knows that Donald Trump has institutionalized his hypocrisy. There are double standards, and he has allowed even Netanyahu to expand war in Gaza, this little territory, which is around 25% territory, Gaza territory. And that is where Trump has been calling Netanyahu that he can do it. But again, he is not going to be a peacemaker. He would be known as a more hypocrite. He's going to be known who's being blackmailed by the Mossad on Gaza. But when it comes to Russia, I think this selective application of his posturing of a peacemaker does not make sense to the world. When an apartheid state, a genocidal regime, would be recommending him as for the Nobel Peace Prize, and then obviously his credibility is going to be at the lowest level. Again, for Donald Trump, it's a great opportunity for him that if there is a peace agreement, even if there is a ceasefire agreement, that is where he is going to project himself as a peacemaker. I don't think the world is going to accept it. Now, the bigger question is where this meeting is going to take place, because Russian President Putin has been under threat from the European countries, from the USA, that he would be arrested because there has been arrest warrants against him. Does it make sense when there are similar arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his top officials, his outgoing defense minister? They are not being executed. Rather, the judges and the prosecutors of the ICC and the ICJ, they have been sanctions. Microsoft has blocked the account of the prosecutor of the ICC. So again, I don't think in a broader context there is going to be a kind of a peace which will hold its grounds. Maybe for the time being, for the public consumption, he would be managing to create optics that he has managed to establish peace between Ukraine and Russia. But again, this is something easier said than done in a broader context. It all depends on the Ukraine's President Zelensky, how far he is willing to concede to the demands of the Russia. And Russian demands are very tough. I don't think they are going to withdraw from the territory, most of the territory they have already held.
Well, with no mutual trust or territorial compromises, as you have mentioned from your words publicly discussed yet, what would you say about how likely is it that the Trump-Putin meeting could deliver a meaningful step toward ending the war in Ukraine without actually being something dangerous and something that could strain the relationships between Russia and the United States, even if it isn't already strained enough?
I think it is the USA which has lost more than the Russia, because during last 3 years, Russia, together with China and other BRIC countries, they managed to come up with an alternative economic system where at least 20 to 22 countries have been now conducting their trade in their local currencies, in their national currencies, and there is also a proposal of having an alternative currency. So they would be bypassing the US dollars. So, and then these sanctions against Russia has not worked. Now there's a lot of pressure on India to stop buying oil from Russia. India is not going to do so, very obviously. So U.S. threats are not working on the countries. It has been holding so dear in the past. So in the broader context, I think these peace it's a good step for the peace agreement. But again, this is going to happen on the terms and the conditions which Moscow would lay down. And I think this is also a great loss for the European countries. This is a great loss, geostrategically speaking, for the NATO and for the European countries, because essentially why this war to begin with was initiated, because Europe wants to divide Russia. It's a country which has the biggest territory in the world. Probably 1/10 of the entire Earth is under the control of Russia. It's the biggest territory, and the plan basically was to weaken Russia over the period of time through a war with Ukraine. And because Ukraine, before Trump's coming into power, was being fully backed militarily by the Europe, and more particularly by the USA under Joe Biden. Now the situation has changed altogether. Russia has a clear edge, and geostrategically speaking, it is going to have a great loss to the European countries in the long run. Europeans would be feeling more threatened that after Ukraine, in future, the next could be other European countries. And then there is also going to be a kind of a renewed threat perception in the Black Sea. Russia gaining more and more territory in Ukraine is also a threat to Turkey, given the historical animosity between the two countries, though at this particular point of time, President Tayyip Erdogan has excellently managed bilateral relation with the Russia. But obviously, Ankara does not feel very comfortable with Russia gaining more and more Ukraine's territory. I think the larger picture which is developing, that geostrategically it is going to be great loss to the Europe, it is going to be great loss to the USA, because with this likely ceasefire agreement, or you may call it a peace agreement, in coming days and weeks, that means it will be on the terms and condition of Russia. That means that will be that will send a shock waves to the European countries, because they propagated over the period of last 3 years that if Ukraine is defeated, then the next is going to be Poland, then next is going to be Germany, and all these neighboring countries. But that means that perception among the European population is going to gain more strength in days and weeks and months to come.
Well, lastly, I would like to ask you your opinion about the timeline. I have been asking the same question about Gaza to Mehmet Çelik as well, and I want to know what is your opinion about Ukraine right now. Do you think that this time around they're going to be able to make a concrete resolution process, start a concrete resolution process, or do you think that it is going to drag on for a while as well?
Well, that is again is a very difficult question to answer. It could take weeks to begin with, optimistically speaking, where there could be possibility of a ceasefire agreement. That is a possible scenario. Now, when the Washington has been saying that the Donald Trump and Russian President Putin can see each other maybe in next week, that means there is a likely possibility of a ceasefire agreement. You know, it all depends on Ukraine, more particularly on President Zelensky, how far he is willing to the traditional demands of Russia, which clearly, militarily speaking, has been saying that since it has a clear edge in the battlefield, so it would dictate its terms and conditions. Europe seems to be now isolated because Trump has taken over the stage. And then it was quite easier for Russia because Trump has been listening to the President Putin's terms and conditions. At one point of time, he was very frustrated because Russia was not ending the war, but now there are signs that Russia is going to end this war. But again, the bigger trouble is about European, the point that I made early on. So far as the timeline is concerned, I think the best hope for everybody is that this war could possibly end within weeks. It all depends what comes out of the meeting between two presidents, and more importantly, on whether or not that meetings take place or not, because it depends on Zelensky how far he would be willing to concede to the Ukraine's territory, which is already under the control of Russia.
Well, do you think that European Union is going to have any take on this? Because you have said that they are not happy about the situation as well.
What they can do it? They're helpless. They try to basically cover the gap that the USA had left wide open after Trump took over as president. And they tried with weapons, they tried with whatever little diplomacy, whatever the little leverage that they had to support Ukraine. But again, Russia is a big military power. Russia had already taken over the 20% territory. Russia had intensified its airstrikes on Kyiv and other major cities of Ukraine, and all the weapons which were coming from the Europe, they did not help Ukraine the way Europe was expecting. And then, more importantly, lately, USA also changed its policy. They said they are going to resume its military weapons to Ukraine, but the payment is going to be made by the rest of the NATO countries. So I think before that could have happened, now we have seen another development where there is a possibility of the peace agreement. So in a broader context, I would say that for Europe, it is a very difficult time. It is a time when they feel very helpless. It is a time when their propaganda has fallen flat in their face. And what will they tell to the European population, to whom they've been telling that if there is a defeat of Ukraine in this battle, then the next is going to be Poland and other neighboring countries, and Europe would be under threat of Russia. So again, Russia now feels very much emboldened because it has an edge militarily on the battlefield, and it knows that its threats to Europe has kept them away from directly intervening in the Ukraine. I mean, sending troops inside the Ukraine to fight against Russia, though privately a significant number of people, maybe some retired soldiers from Europe and the USA, they've been participating in war against Russia, but that did not help. On the other hand, North Korea sent tens of thousands of the troops. And I think Iranians' help was already there, not only just providing military weapons, but I think there were some mercenaries who were also provided by Iran to fight against Ukraine. So, and then there were also reports of the Chinese fighting for Russia in Ukraine, though China has been denying all those reports. What I'm saying is that Russia has managed to build up a kind of a very loose coalition. A loose coalition where he has sent message to the Europe, where he has sent message to the USA that it has a parallel world, and he is not willing to accept their orders, to accept their dictates. You may recall just a couple of days ago, when there was a talk of a deadline by the President Trump to Russia that if this war is not ended within 2 weeks, then there will be sanctions against Russia, and then there was also a statement by the former president and former prime minister of Russia, who's also, I think, the deputy head of a security council in Russia. And then his tone was a threatening that Trump's rhetoric could possibly lead towards a direct war between USA and Russia. And then we have also seen that Trump was making a lot of remarks that he has ordered a nuclear submarine to reposition themselves close to the Russian borders in case there is a war between two countries. I think that was more for the public consumption. That was more to bring Russia under pressure to the tipping point. My understanding is that economically speaking, Russia has effectively managed to an alternative economic system. Whereby it has been surviving. These American threats have not worked in the past. These are not working in the past. Now, if there is a ceasefire agreement, the possibility is that all those sanctions against Russia by Europe and by the USA would be lifted. And the territories, all the territories which Russia is holding now, maybe most of it, would be legalized by the UN, because I think some kind of agreement would be there. So Europe would be very upset. But it is a Russia which will have clear edge on Europe and USA.
Thank you, Javed. Thank you so much for your answer, and thank you so much for joining us here on A News.
growing tide of anti-Israel sentiments. What you see behind me is just tip of the iceberg of what is happening in the country. More than half of $52 billion black CIA budget is spent on espionage network in Pakistan. How would you handle it?
The US has looked upon Pakistan as an ally at one point and then as an enemy at the same time.
That is going to be the first legal reason on the basis of which he is going to be instantly ousted by the Supreme Court of Pakistan.
Joining us live, Javed Rana, who's an expert on politics and geostrategic issues.
In the world politics, which is not being driven by any moral principle, it is being driven by the hard geostrategic realities. In a broader picture, more countries would aspire to have nuclear weapons.